Alright. So chapter 1 is the journey to finding the root cause of suffering. So what is the root cause of suffering? Why do we suffer? Right?
Right.
There's a quotation by Thich Nhat Hanh that says, people have a hard time letting go of their suffering out of the fear of the unknown. They prefer suffering that is familiar. So people prefer to suffer even without knowing that they are preferring to suffer, because everybody basically starts suffering because, like he said in the quotation, out of fear of the unknown. So that means that they don't want to move on. They're so, whatever has happened has gotten them to a point to where they don't want to move on, because they're afraid of the unknown of what could possibly happen if they was to change something or start something new. So that's what that means. Out of fear of the unknown, people prefer suffering because it is familiar. So it's basically like you're just going back to what is just comfortable for you, what you are used to, what you are comfortable with. Right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, getting into the chapter, there is an important distinction to make when speaking about suffering. When I mention suffering in this book, I'm referring to psychological and emotional suffering. There is a way in which no matter what happens in your life, you do not have to suffer emotionally and psychologically. I am not saying that what we go through is all in our heads or made up. Terrible and unfortunate events happen to people every single day. What I'm saying is that although we experience a lot of pain in our lives, suffering is optional. In other words, pain is unavoidable. Pain is unavoidable. We cannot avoid pain. It's a part of our journey. But how we react to the events and circumstances that happen in our lives is up to us. And that we dictate whether we suffer or not. So it's literally a lot of the events that happen to us may hurt us. We may feel the pain that this event or circumstance has caused, but it is our reaction to that thought. It is our reaction to that pain that we feel that dictates whether we suffer or not. Buddhists say that anytime we experience a negative event in our lives, 2 arrows fly our way. Being physically struck by an arrow is painful. Being struck by a second emotional arrow is even more painful, i.e., suffering. The Buddha explained, in life, we can't always control the first arrow. However, the second arrow is our reaction to the first. The second arrow is optional. When I first heard of this quote from Buddha a few years back, I was confounded because although I understood what he meant, I did not know how I could apply this in my own life. If anyone were given the clear choice of suffering and not suffering, I don't think anyone in their right mind would choose to suffer. So how can I just choose not to suffer? If it were as easy as that, I don't think anyone would be suffering anymore. It wasn't until years later that I came across a new understanding of where suffering comes from, that I was able to stop it at its source. As I began my journey of self-improvement, I came across a myriad of different teachings, studies, and methods to help people overcome their problems. I read dozens, if not hundreds of books, I studied psychology, went to therapists, listened to many different thought leaders, tried changing my habits, waking up at 4 a.m., changing my diet, becoming more structured and disciplined. I did shadow work, studying personality types, meditating daily, going on spiritual retreats, following spiritual masters, and researching different ancient religions. If you name it, I've probably tried it. I was desperate to find an answer because I wanted to know how to stop suffering in my own life as well as help others do the same. Although some of these things did help me improve incrementally, it didn't stop my suffering. I still always felt extremely anxious, fearful, unfulfilled, irritated, angry, frustrated, and heavy every day. Even after doing all of that, I still didn't discover the answer. And if I'm being honest, I was even more lost than before I started on this quest. But that's what happens when you start to enter a spiritual journey. You will start to feel lost because you're starting to experience things that you've never experienced before. Many different doors and things are opening once you enter that journey of spirituality and finding yourself, because now you're on the journey to yourself. So he goes on to say in this chapter, I felt purposeless, hopeless, and directionless. Meaning he felt like he didn't have a purpose. He started to be hopeless about his journey, about where he was going in life, who he was destined to be. Like, why am I here? He felt directionless, meaning he didn't know what direction to go in. I had that same experience a few times. But continuing on, I didn't know what to do anymore, where to look, or who to talk to. It wasn't until I was in my darkest hour that a glimmer of hope began to lead me to the light. That's how it always happens. All of a sudden, after years and years of searching, I stumbled upon one of my first mentors that taught me how to become a coach. And he revealed to me the answer of how I can alleviate my own suffering. The answer I discovered was in the understanding of how our minds work and how the human experience is created. Chapter 2. The root cause of all suffering. So now we're going to get into the actual root cause of the suffering. There is a quote by Matshana Deliwayo, or Deliwayo. One who looks around him is intelligent. One who looks within him is wise. So, intelligence is from the outside. You can look and search for things on the outside in the physical, meaning you can read books, you can look at videos, things, all those type of things, and you can learn so much, and you can gain and grasp and gather so much information that you become that makes you intelligent. But when you look within yourself as well, because you cannot just look on the outside. You can't just go and think you're going to do research on the outside and then think that you just know everything because, well, I read this book, I watched this video, or I talked to this person, You have to also go within yourself and you have to ask questions. A person who is intelligent asks questions. A person who is ignorant thinks that they know everything. The truth be told, we don't really truly know everything individually. I'll get more into that about the individualness. But individually, as individual fragments of our divine selves, we don't fully know every single thing. But we are intelligent and we become wise because we ask questions. And we also, instead of just looking on the outside, we also look within. Because when you look within, that is where you get your most ultimate main answers, is from within. Anybody can tell you something because they've experienced something, and so they can tell you only from their own experience. But it is your experience, and it is you that you have to look within to get the true answers to what you seek. If that makes sense. You good? Are you understanding me? I'll explain it a little bit more to you later, okay? When I'm done.
Okay.
Alright. So chapter 2, the root cause of all suffering. We live in a world of thought, not reality. Sydney Banks once said, "Thought is not reality. Yet it is through thought that our realities are created." So each of us lives through our own perceptions of the world, which are vastly different from the person right next to us. An example of this is that you could be sitting in a coffee shop having a quarter-life existential crisis, completely stressed out of your mind about how you have no idea what you're doing with your life when it seems like everyone else has theirs together. While the person next to you is happily enjoying their freshly brewed drink while peacefully people watching, you both are in the same exact coffee shop, smelling the same aroma, surrounded by the same strangers, but how the world looks to both of you couldn't be more different. Many of us go through the exact same events or are in the same location at the same time, yet are having completely different experiences of the world. Here is another example of how we live in a world of thought and not reality. If you walk up to 100 different people and ask each of them what money means to them, how many different answers do you think that you'll get?
I would think 2.
If you go and you ask 100 people what money means to them, how many different answers would you get?
Maybe 12 or 11.
That's what you think? You would get close to 100 different answers. You're asking 100 people the same question, but all those 100 people are going to give you different answers. Why? I'm about to tell you. Money is technically the same thing, but it means something different to each person. Money could mean time, freedom, opportunity, security, peace of mind, or it can mean evil, greed, and the reason why people commit crimes. For now, I'm not going to get into which one is right or wrong. But here's a hint. There is no right or wrong answer. But that's for a different chapter. Yes.
That reminds me of when my teacher, when I was at school, she said this is going to be an easy test, but there's also no right or wrong answer.
Mm-hmm. Another illustration of this concept is as follows. If you survey 100 different people and ask each of them what they think of our current president, how many different answers do you think you get? Even though it is the same exact person that we're talking about, we will get 100 different answers because most people live in their own thoughts and perceptions of the world. The meaning or thinking we give an event is what determines how we ultimately feel about it. That meaning or thinking is the filter through which we see life from. Then on, because of this, we live through a perception of reality, not in reality itself. Reality is that the event happened with no meaning, thinking, or interpretation of it. In meaning or thinking we give the event is any meaning or thinking that we give the event is on us, and that is how our perception of reality is created. This is how our experience of life is created from the inside out. It's not about the events that happen in our lives, but our interpretation of them, which causes us to feel good or bad about something. This is how people in third world countries can be happier than people in first world countries. And people in first world countries can be more miserable than people in third world countries. Our feelings do not come from external events, but from our own thinking about the events. Therefore, we can only ever feel what we are thinking. So let's hypothetically say that you really hate your job and it causes you an enormous amount of stress, anxiety, and frustration. It pains you to even set foot in the building where you work, and just thinking about your job makes you furious. When you're thinking about your job, you're just sitting there on a sofa with your family watching a TV show together. But you are fuming at the thought of your job, while everyone else is having a good time except for you. Yes, are you raising your hand? Oh. In this moment, everyone else in your family is having a different experience of life than you are, even though the same event is happening. Just the thought of work created a whole different perception of reality, even though you're not physically at work. If it were true that external events cause us to feel the way we feel inside, then you should be a happy camper in your living room, watching a funny TV show with your family every single time you do this activity. But that's not the case. Now you may be saying that you're only feeling this way because an external event, your job, is causing you to feel stressed and anxious. To that, I'll ask the question. Is it absolutely true that every single person feels the exact same way about the job that they are working in? Two different people can be doing the exact same job, but will have completely different experiences of that job. It can be the most amazing experience in a dream job for one person, but be another person's worst nightmare and living hell. The only difference between one person and the other is how they think about their job, which determines how they ultimately feel about the job. Now, let's go back to the original scenario of you hypothetically hating your job. Remember how much stress, anxiety, and frustration it causes you when you think about it. Let's do a quick thought experiment about that by answering the question. So, question. Who would you be without that thought that you hated your job? Take 1 minute to see what comes up for you and don't move on until you do that. So I'll wait. I'll give you a minute. Think about it. Who would you be without the thought that you hated your job? Okay. If you don't overthink it and truly let the answer surface from within you, without that thought, you will most likely feel and be happy, peaceful, free, and light. Without our usual thinking about a particular event or thing, our experience of it completely alters. This is how we live in a world of thought and not reality, and how our perception of reality is created from the inside out, through our own thinking. With this new understanding, you've just uncovered the cause of all our human psychological suffering. So, what is the root cause of our suffering? The root cause of our suffering is our own thinking. Now, he says, now before you throw this book across the room and light it on fire, I'm not saying that this is all in our heads and that it isn't real. Our perception of reality is very real. We will feel what we think, and our feelings are real. That is completely undeniable. However, our thinking will look like an inevitable, unchangeable reality to us until we begin seeing how our reality is created. If we know that we can only ever feel what we are thinking, then we know that we can change our feelings by changing our thinking. Thus, we can change our experience of life by knowing that it comes from our own thinking. And if that is true, then we are ever only one thought away from experiencing something different and transforming our entire lives at any moment through a state of no thought. In short, the moment we stop thinking is when our happiness begins. Stop thinking. So y'all, I know you're gonna ask, well, how do I stop thinking? Like, you can't just stop thinking. Well, we're about to get into it in just a moment. But real quick, we got a quick little story right here. What's up? What's up?
Nothing, I just said true.
Okay. All right, so here's a quick little Zen story about how thinking is the cause of our own suffering. It's about a young monk and the empty boat. A long time ago, a young Zen monk was living in a small monastery that was located in a forest which was near a small lake. The monastery was occupied by a few senior monks while the rest were newcomers and still had much to learn. The monks had many obligations in the monastery, but one of the most important ones was their daily routine where they had to sit down, close their eyes, and meditate in silence for hours at a time. After each meditation, they had to report their progress to the mentor. The young monk had difficulty staying focused during his meditation practice for a variety of reasons, which made him very mad. After the young monk reported his progress, or better said, lack of it, to his mentor, the elder monk asked the young monk a simple question that had a hidden lesson. Do you know what is really making you angry? The young monk replied, well, usually as soon as I close my eyes and begin to meditate, there is someone moving around and I can't focus. I get agitated that someone is disturbing me even though they know that I'm meditating. How can they not be more considerate? And then when I close my eyes again and try to focus, a cat or a small animal might brush past and disturb me again. By this point, even when the wind blows and the tree branches make noise, I get angry. If that is not enough, the birds keep on chirping and I can't seem to find any peace in this place. The elder monk simply pointed out to his pupil, I see that you become angrier with each interruption you encounter. This is exactly the opposite of what is the point of your task when meditating. You should find a way not to get angry with people or animals or any other thing around you that disturbs you during your task. After their consultation, the young monk went out of the monastery and looked around to find a place that would be quieter so that he could meditate peacefully. He found such a place at the store of the lake. He found a place at the shore of the lake that is nearby. He brought his mat, sat down, and started meditating. But soon a flock of birds splashed down in the lake near where the monk was meditating. Hearing their noise, the monk opened his eyes to see what was going on. Although the bank of the lake was quieter than the monastery, there were still things that would disturb his peace, and he again got angry. Even though he didn't find the peace he was looking for, he kept returning to the lake. Then one day, the monk saw a boat tied at the end of a small pier, and right then an idea hit him. Why don't I take the boat, row it down to the middle of the lake, and meditate there? In the middle of the lake, there will be nothing to disturb me. He rowed the boat to the middle of the lake and started meditating. As he had expected, there was nothing in the middle of the lake to disturb him. He was able to meditate the whole day. At the end of the day, he returned to the monastery. This continued for a couple of days, and the monk was thrilled that he had finally found a place to meditate in peace. He hadn't felt angry and could continue the meditation practice in a calm manner. On the third day, the monk sat in the boat, rowed to the middle of the lake, and started meditating again. A few minutes later, he heard some splashing of water and felt that the boat was rocking. He started getting upset that even in the middle of the lake, there was someone or something disturbing him. When he opened his eyes, he saw a boat heading straight towards him. He shouted, "Steer your boat away, or else you will hit my boat." But the other boat kept coming straight at him and was just a few feet away. He yelled again, but nothing changed. And so the incoming boat hit the monk's boat. Now he was furious. He screamed, "Who are you and why have you hit my boat in the middle of this vast lake?" There was no answer. This made the young monk even angrier. He stood up to see who was in the other boat, and to his surprise, he found that there was no one in the boat. The boat had probably drifted along in the breeze and had bumped into the monk's boat. The monk found his anger dissipating. It was just an empty boat. There was no one to get angry at. At that moment, he remembered his mentor's question. Do you know what is really making you angry? And then wondered, It's not other people, situations, or circumstances. It's not the empty boat, but my reaction to it that causes my anger. All the people or situations that make me upset and angry are just like the empty boat. They don't have the power to make me angry without my own reaction. The monk then rowed the boat back to the shore. He returned to the monastery and started meditating along with the other monks. There were still noises and disturbances around, but the monk treated them as the empty boat and continued to meditate peacefully. When the elder monk saw the difference, he simply said to the young monk, "I see that you have found what is really making you angry, and you have overcome that." Chapter 3. So, why do we even think? Why do we think?
I don't know. It's just part of imagining things or just thinking and stuff. That's all. Like, I don't know much.
It's okay. All right. So, chapter 3. Why do we even think? Quote by Jonathan Safran Foer. I think and think and think. I've thought myself out of happiness 1,000,000 times, but never once into it. We as humans have evolved to develop a sophisticated ability to rationalize, analyze, and think because it simply helped us survive. Our minds do an incredible job to keep us alive, but it does not help us thrive. It is concerned solely with our safety and survival, but not our fulfillment or joy. The mind's job is to alert us of potential dangers in our environment that may threaten our lives. It does its job so well that not only will it scan our immediate surroundings for threats, but it will even reference our backlog of past experiences to create hypothetical scenarios and predict what it thinks could be future potential dangers based on our memories. None of this is wrong by any means. The mind is simply doing what it was designed to do. When we don't understand that its only duty is to help us survive, then we will get angry and frustrated with it. But all conflict is derived from an innocent misunderstanding. Our mind's duty is to keep us alive. Our consciousness duty is to help us feel fulfilled. Your soul is the reason why you're even on this journey in the first place. To find peace, love, and joy for yourself. Your mind has done an amazing job at what it was made to do. But now you may relieve it of its job because we no longer live in the wild where death could be right around the corner in a bush. If we keep using our minds, we will constantly stay in a state of fight or flight, anxiety, fear, frustration, depression, anger, resentment, and all negative emotions because the mind thinks everything is a threat to our very existence. If you want to be free, happy, peaceful, and full of love, then you will need to let go of listening only to your mind and go beyond it by tuning into something much greater that will help you not just survive, but to thrive.
Can I use the bathroom?
Yeah.
Thank you.
bathroom break. Welcome back.
Okay.
All right. So we are on chapter 4. Yes. Chapter 4. Thoughts versus thinking. So, there is a difference between thoughts and thinking. Quote by Lao Tzu. Stop thinking and end your problems. Thoughts are the energetic mental raw materials from which we use to create everything in the world. I'll say that again. Thoughts are the energetic mental raw materials from which we use to create everything in the world. We can't experience anything without thought. It's important to know that thoughts are a noun and are not something that we do, but something that we have. A thought takes no effort or force on our end, and it is something that just happens. So thoughts are something that just happens. It's something that we have. We have thoughts. We also cannot control what thoughts pop into our minds. The source of thoughts comes from something that is beyond our minds, the universe, if you will. Thinking, on the other hand, is the act of thinking about our thoughts. I'll say that again. Thinking is the act of thinking about our thoughts. This takes a significant amount of energy, effort, and willpower, which is a finite resource. Thinking is actively engaging with the thoughts in our mind. You don't have to engage with each thought in your mind. But when you do, that is thinking. So when you engage with your thoughts, then you are now thinking. You may have a thought, but that does not mean that you have to engage with some of those thoughts. You choose to engage with those thoughts. That's your choice. You have a thought, then you start to think about it. You start to think about what just came into your mind. And if that thought is a negative thought, you start thinking about it, that is where you start bringing on your suffering, because now you're thinking negatively about whatever thought just came into your mind. Or because you just engaged yourself with that negative thought that popped into your mind. You engaged with it, meaning you've caused yourself to now feel certain emotions. You made yourself feel mad. You made yourself feel sad because you started thinking about that thought that just popped up in your mind. So that there begins the suffering in your own life. So you have the option to choose whether to think about your thoughts or not to think about your thoughts. You have the option to choose if you want to suffer or not. So that's something to think about. Think about that. All right. Thinking is the root cause of all of our psychological suffering. Now you might be wondering, well, where do positive thoughts fit into the picture? Positive thoughts, or thoughts that feel good, are not a result of thinking. They are instead generated by our natural state of peace, love, and joy. They are a byproduct of a state of being, not a state of thinking. We will go into depth about this in the next chapter. For now, let's do a quick thought experiment. So I'll ask you a question, and all you need to do is to be aware of what you are experiencing. And we'll review what happened after. All right. Question. What is the dream amount of money that you would want to make in a year? Pause here and wait for an answer to surface. Give yourself about 30 to 60 seconds to think about your answer of how much money you want to be making in a year. Do not move on to the next step until you have had a decently sized train of thought about how much you want to make. All right, I'm going to give you 30 to 60 seconds. Think about it. What is the dream amount of money that you would want to make in a year? What is the dream amount of money that you would want to make in a year?
$55,000. I just want to be rich. I'm tired of having this low, poor money. I just want more money so we can have more food. I mean, we have more food. I mean, I just want even more because sometimes I get super hungry.
You're funny.
Thank you, Mrs. Mom, aka Mrs. Turner.
Okay. 30 seconds, 60 seconds up. All right, so you thought about how much money you want to make in a year. Now, take that amount and multiply that by 5. Multiply the amount that you dream of making in a year by 5. What do you think about the new dream goal for your income when multiplied by 5? Take at least another 30 to 60 seconds to become aware of how you feel when you think about that and see what other thinking comes up for you as you feel your emotions. Do not move on until you've done the above. So I'm going to give you another 30 seconds. Go ahead, multiply it by 5. Think about how you would feel about that new amount. How that's looking to you. How do it feel to you? What are you feeling now? All right. So let's bring it back in and review what happened. After I asked the first question of what is the dream amount of money you want to be making per year, within a few seconds an answer popped up in your mind. That is a thought. Notice how quickly and effortlessly that came to you. After an answer popped into your mind, I asked you to think about your answer. What happened once I asked you to think about your answer? If you're like most people, you probably went on a wild roller coaster once you began thinking about the thought. You might have been thinking how there's no way you can make that much. No one in your family is making that much money. You don't know how to make that much. It's stupid to want that much money, or that it makes you greedy. But notice how you felt when you were thinking about those thoughts. Most likely it didn't feel that great, but that is okay. And I'll show you what you can do about it soon. So that is for if you had any negative thoughts about it. But for some of y'all that might be on a greater path right now, you may have had a positive thought about it. So while we're talking right now, it seems as we're talking about right now is the negative thoughts and having the negative thinking about it. I want you guys that had the positive thoughts to think about it in a positive way. Or even if you had a positive thought pop up, do the same thing what we just said right here. Rewind it back. I'm not gonna reread it. Rewind the video back. But notice how you felt when you were thinking about those thoughts. If you had a positive thought about it, then it might have felt great. But if not, then most likely it didn't feel that great. Because like he said, if you're like most people, you're probably thinking like, oh, it's impossible, da 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 da. Because that's pretty much the majority of the world right now we all have damn near like negative thoughts about money nowadays because of certain things that's going on in the world. But again, notice how you felt when you were thinking about those thoughts. Most likely it didn't feel that great, but that is okay. And I'll show you what you can do about it. This is a prime example of thoughts versus thinking. If I ask you a question, you will 100% have a thought that pops up into your mind. Thoughts are not inherently bad. Remember that they are the energetic mental raw materials from which we create in the world. The moment we think about our thoughts is when we begin to get taken on an emotional roller coaster. When we think about our thoughts, we begin to judge and criticize those thoughts and experience all sorts of internal emotional turmoil. When I asked you how much you wanted to make, you had a thought about the amount. That thought was neutral and didn't cause any emotional toil. In fact, you might have felt expansive and excited. It was only when you began thinking about that thought of how much you wanted to make, which is what caused the self-doubt, unworthiness, anxiety, anger, guilt, or any other emotion you may have experienced. This is what I mean by thinking is the root cause of all suffering. Having the initial thought of how much you wanted to make did not cause any suffering until you began thinking about the thought of how much you wanted to make. It is not necessary to think about our thoughts or to judge them. It does us no good to do so. We may think that thinking is helping us, but all it's really doing is causing us to feel all of these negative, unwanted emotions and making us create reasons as to why we can't do it or why we shouldn't want it. The only thing that was useful and helpful was the initial thought that popped into your mind when I first asked how much you wanted to make. All of the thinking that happened after was destructive and unhelpful. Thoughts create, thinking destroys. The reason thinking destroys is because as soon as we begin to think about the thoughts, we cast our own limiting beliefs, judgments, criticisms, programming, and conditioning onto the thought, thinking of infinite reasons as to why we can't do it and why we can't have it. Without thinking, we prevent all negative programming and judgments from tarnishing the initial thought of what you wanted to create. If I ask you what are some ways you can make the amount of money you want, if you sat there long enough, you'll experience the same phenomenon of having random thoughts pop into your head of ways you could make it happen. These are thoughts of creation, thoughts of inherently infinite, expansive, and energetically positive. You'll know you are having thoughts from the divine when you feel positive emotions, feel lighter and alive. As soon as you begin thinking about those thoughts of the ways that you can make the money you want, you will immediately feel heavy, restricted, limited, along with a whole onslaught of negative emotions. This is how you will know if you are thinking. I use my feelings as an internal radar that tells me whether I'm getting direct downloads of thoughts from the universe or if I'm in my head thinking about my thoughts. You can only ever feel what you're thinking. So feelings and emotions are like an intuitive internal dashboard which tells me if I'm thinking too much or not. If I'm having a lot of negative emotions, I know that I am thinking too much. This is another example of how we are naturally built for success. Below is a chart that compares thinking versus thoughts to help you identify which one is which within your mind. So here is the chart. You see that chart? Here is the chart. All right, so thoughts versus thinking chart. You have the attribute, you have the thoughts, and then you have thinking. So the attribute is source. Thought would be the universe. Thinking is ego. Attribute, weight. Thought, light. Thinking, heavy. Attribute, energy. Thought, expansive. Thinking, restrictive. Attribute, nature. Thought, infinite. Thinking, limited. Attribute, quality. Thought, creative. Thinking, destructive. Attribute, charge. Thought, positive. Thinking, negative. Attribute, essence. Thought, divine. Thinking, mortal. Attribute, feeling. Thought, alive. Thinking, stressful. Attribute, emotion. Thought, love. Thinking, fear. Attribute, belief. Thought, infinite possibilities. Thinking, confining. Attribute, sense. Thought, wholeness. Thinking, separateness. Attribute, effort. Thought, effortless. Thinking, laborious. Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is, if we can only feel what we're thinking, don't we need to think positively to feel that way?
I could say yeah.
A quote by Dickon Bettinger or Bettinger. We are ever only one thought away from peace, love, and joy, which come from a state of no thought. Dickon Bettinger's quote again was, "We are ever only one thought away from peace, love, and joy, which comes from a state of no thought." There is a caveat that I haven't mentioned yet to the principle that we can only feel what we're thinking. The more accurate way of describing it is that we can only ever feel negative emotions when we are thinking. The goal isn't necessarily to completely stop feeling negative emotions. Some of the negative emotions can be helpful, such as feeling fearful when deciding to walk down a dark alley alone with no one else in sight. These negative emotions are only helpful to us in terms of survival. But if we don't constantly encounter life or death situations, negative emotions are more unhelpful than helpful for most of us. We're going to be moving forward with the context that we're not struggling for physical survival. So we'll be using the context that negative emotions are not necessary most of the time. When I mentioned that we can only ever feel what we are thinking, most people assume that we must think positive to feel positive emotions. Instead of convincing you if this is true or not, let's do another thought experiment so you can experience the truth for yourself. Let me tell you, this is metaphysics. Metaphysics encourages you to think or to experience things for yourself. It is not telling you what is right, what is wrong. It is not telling you that this is the truth, that this, and that. We're telling you what we know to be the truth, but you can only know that truth if you experience it yourself. So, in metaphysics, that is how we reach the people. And that is how we teach. We help you. We encourage you to have your own experience. Because I can teach you something and tell you something, and it's up to you if you want to believe it or not. But if you feel skeptical or you feel questionable about it, then that is why we encourage you to do your own research or to do certain experimentations within our teachings for you to experience it yourself. And once you experience it, then you can tell us if it's true or not. Because your experience is the true, ultimate truth of all. And I'll go a little bit more in depth into that in another thing, or maybe at the end of this. But yeah, I'm gonna get deeper into that later. Because right now this is about the book, and I'm supposed to be reading this book. I'm reading 5 chapters today. All right. Continuing on. Recall a time when you felt the most joy and love you've ever felt in your life, and feel the feelings that you felt at that time as much as you can for at least 30 seconds. I'll wait. All right. What kinds of thoughts were going through your mind at that peak moment when you felt the most joy and love? I'm not asking what you were doing at the time, but what thoughts were going through your head at that exact moment. For many people that answer this, they realize that they didn't have any thoughts during that exact moment. For others, they say that the thought was that they were so grateful or happy. For those that answered that they had the thought that they were grateful, did you feel that joy and love before you had that thought or after? Take 10 to 15 seconds to answer that question before moving on. So I'll ask it again in case you did not get that. Did you feel that joy and love before you had that thought or after? What insights and epiphanies did you have? What's crazy is that most people didn't have any thoughts going through their mind when they felt the happiest and the most amount of love in their lives. For those that had the thought that they were grateful, they felt that way before having that thought. If they had that thought, it happened after they felt the feelings, so the thought could not have produced the feeling. If they had that thought that it happened after they felt the feelings, the thought could not have produced the feeling. This brings us to another truth. You do not have to have thoughts or think to feel positive emotions. The beautiful part about truth is that it needs no justification because it can be experienced right here, right now. It does not need to be proven or rationalized to you, and you experience this truth firsthand by the experiment that we just did. Here's why we don't need to have thoughts or think to feel positive emotions like joy and love. Our natural state of being is joy, love, ecstasy, freedom, and gratitude. This may be hard to believe because if it's natural, why don't we feel that way all the time? I'll answer this in a bit. And I actually answered that in one of my previous videos that was, if you go to Channeled Messages, episode 1, if you go to that, Channel Messages from Source, I actually speak on that. So, if we want to see the natural state of anything, one of the best ways is to look at nature and the state of it in its infancy, before it is affected and conditioned by its environment. So when you look out into the world, you look out in nature. Look at what it is before it was affected, before it was corrupted, before it was destroyed or conditioned by its environment, meaning all of the different pollutions and stuff. Before all of that, just look at nature and how it is now, how it was before all of the conditioned and affectedness that has happened here. For example, let's look at the natural state of a baby. What is a baby's natural and default state? Assuming the baby wasn't abused, neglected, or had any physical issues. Are babies naturally stressed, anxious, fearful, and self conscious? Or are they naturally in a state of bliss, happiness, and love? Our natural state of being is joy, love, and peace. Therefore, any thinking that we do will only take us away from those natural states of being. Which is why, whenever we feel extremely stressed, we are having a lot of thinking going on. The strength of the negative emotion we feel is in direct proportion to how much thinking we are doing in the moment. On the other hand, the intensity of the positive emotion we feel is inversely proportional to the amount of thinking we are doing in the moment. In other words, the less thinking we have going on, the stronger the positive emotion we feel in the present. To see the truth in this, recall a few other memories you had when you were extremely stressed and anxious and see how much thinking was going on at that time. Take about 1 to 2 minutes to do this. I'm giving you a few minutes, give you a couple minutes. Okay. Then recall a few memories where you were at your happiest or felt the most joy and love, and see how much thinking you had going on at that time. So again, to see the truth in all this, in other words, the less thinking that we have going on, the stronger the positive emotion we feel in the present. So to see the truth in this, recall a few other memories that you've had when you were extremely stressed and anxious, and see how much thinking was going on at the time. Take about 1 to 2 minutes to do this. You can pause. Yes, I know I read it again because I need this to get through. Then, after you take that 1 to 2 minutes, recall a few memories where you were at your happiest or felt the most joy and love, and see how much thinking you had going on at that time. Take another 1 to 2 minutes to do this before moving on to really experience and internalize the truth of what you see. An analogy that my coach taught me that helped crystallize this concept was to imagine our mind has a speedometer, like in a car. But instead of miles per hour, it is thoughts per minute. The more thinking we have going on, the higher the thought-o-meter goes. And if we have enough thinking going on, it'll go to the red zone. This is when we feel extremely stressed, burned out, frustrated, and angry. It is not the content of our thinking that causes us stress, but that we are thinking, period. The amount of thinking we have going on is directly correlated to the magnitude of stress and negative emotions we are experiencing at any given moment. When you're experiencing a lot of frustration, stress, anxiety, or any negative emotions, just know that it is because you are thinking. And the intensity of those emotions is directly correlated to how much thinking is going on. Therefore, it is not what we're thinking about that is causing us suffering, but it is that we are thinking. To summarize, we do not have to try to think positive, to experience love, joy, bliss, and any positive emotions we want, because it is our natural state to feel those emotions. The only times we don't naturally feel these emotions is when we begin to think about the thoughts that we are having, thus blocking the direct connection to infinite intelligence, and we feel stressed, anxious, depressed, and fearful. It is not about the content of our thinking, but that we are thinking, which is the root cause of our suffering. The intensity of the negative emotions is directly correlated to the amount of thinking we have going on in the present. The less thinking we have, the more space we create for positive emotions to naturally surface. That concludes all 5 chapters for this particular video. In the next video, I will do 5 more chapters. So, I want you to now actually think about what we just experienced, what I just read. And see what your outcome is and what your experience is. And possibly what your new mindset or outlook on these things are. All right, until next time, namaste. The divinity in me recognizes the divinity in you. Peace, love, and light.